The air around Blackwater Bay was heavy with mist as Ned Stark rode beside his son Robb, their cloaks damp and their thoughts sharper than steel. They had gathered their forces in secret, marching through river paths and hidden trails to reach the city's edge. Now, at the break of dawn, King's Landing stood before them. Silent but dangerous. Robb's scouts had returned with news. The Mudgate guards would change shifts at sunrise, creating a narrow window to act. Robb's young face was tense, his hand resting on his sword. "If we move now, father, we can take the city before the lions even stir." Ned studied the dark outline of the walls, his grey eyes cold but steady. "Remember, Robb," he said, voice low, "we come not to burn, but to restore order. If they yield, we spare them, but if they resist—" His hand tightened on the hilt of ice. Their plan relied on speed and secrecy. Varys, the spider, had whispered of a weakness in the city's defenses, a point where the City Watch's loyalty could be bought or swayed. Littlefinger, ever smiling and slippery, had offered assistance, but Ned trusted him no more than a viper in a child's crib. Instead, he placed his faith in Robb, the Blackfish, and the men of the North and Riverlands, who stood ready. Behind them, when they reached a mudgate, the heavy doors loomed like a beast guarding its den. Torches flickered along the battlements, and gold cloaks paced lazily above. Janos Slynt, commander of the City Watch, was there, his armor dented and his eyes wary. Robb rode forward, lifting his voice so it carried up the stone walls. "Seer Janos, I am Robb Stark of Winterfell. Open the gate and stand aside. We come to protect the king and the people of this city." Slynt frowned, glancing at the banners behind them. Direwolves, trout and riverlords, sigils swaying in the faint breeze. "Protect," he called down, voice uncertain, "or conquer." Ned nudged his horse forward so torchlight caught his face. "I am Lord Eddard Stark. We seek no blood if none is offered. Swear your loyalty to the crown, not to lions who think themselves kings, and you and your men will be fed and kept safe." The silence stretched, above archers' readied bows, unsure where loyalty lay. The gold cloaks had always been known to shift with the wind, and right now, the wind carried the weight of thousands of northern and riverland soldiers pressing against the city's heart. Then, slowly, Janos Slynt raised his hand. "Open the gate," he barked. Chains clanked, and the heavy doors began to creak apart. Relief rippled through the Stark forces as the city seemed ready to yield without blood. But Ned's victory was short-lived. A sharp, acrid smell reached him, wildfire. He spotted barrels hidden beneath the gatehouse, their green seals catching the torchlight. Before he could speak, a cold voice cut through the mist. Cersei Lannister stood above them on the parapet, her golden hair catching the dawn. "Welcome to King's Landing, Lord Stark," she called, her smile thin and sharp. "Do come in, if you dare." Ned's hand tightened on ice. The game was not yet won. The air around the mudgate grew heavy, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Robb's hand rested on his sword, his knuckles white. Ned raised a hand, signaling his men to hold. The chains still groaned, the gate half open. But Cersei's smile above told him this was no surrender. It was a trap. Robb's voice was sharp. "Father, we can storm the gate now. Our men outnumbered them 2-1. Ned shook his head. Slightly, his grey eyes fixed on the barrels beneath the archway. "Wildfire," he murmured. "One spark, and this entire gate becomes our tomb." He turned to the Blackfish, who stood at his side, face grim beneath his helm. Seer Brynden, take 50 men and find the postern near the Dragon Gate. If they try to burn us out, we'll need another way inside. The Blackfish nodded and disappeared into the shadows with his chosen men. Above them, Cersei leaned against the parapet, her green eyes glittering in the torchlight. Did you think it would be so easy, Lord Stark, that you and your boy could march your wolves to my gates and take my son's throne? Her voice was calm, almost playful, but Ned could hear the tension beneath it. Robb called up, his voice steady despite the fire in his veins. Your son's throne. The realm belongs to the crown, not the Lannisters. Open the gates and bend the knee, and we'll spare the city. Cersei laughed softly, the sound carrying over the silence of the dawn. Spare the city, oh sweet boy. The city is mine already. Do you think these gold cloaks serve the crown? They serve whoever holds the purse strings, and I hold them tight. Ned glanced at Janos Slynt, whose face was pale beneath his helm. The man stood frozen, torn between two masters. Choose wisely, Slynt, Ned said quietly. Choose the realm, or you'll drown in its ashes. Before Slynt could answer, a horn sounded from the south. 1, 2, 3 blasts. Davos, sea signal from the Blackwater's mist. Small boats glided into view, Stark and Tully men slipping ashore from the river. The city was surrounded on 2 fronts now, and Cersei saw it too. Her lips tightened. From behind the walls, the clang of metal rose, voices shouting commands. The gold cloaks were scrambling, some to defend the gate, others deserting their posts. Confusion rippled through the city's defenses. Robb turned to his father, eagerness in his eyes. Now's our chance, father. If we move fast, we take the Red Keep before they can light the wildfire. Ned hesitated, weighing every possible path. Charging now risked setting the entire mudgate aflame. Waiting too long risked losing their only advantage. Finally, he gave the order, archers forward. Keep their heads down. Shield wall ready. 100 northern bows bent in unison, arrows catching the torchlight like sparks ready to fly. Robb raised his sword, voice ringing over the chaos. Winterfell. He roared, and the men answered. A tide of wolves ready to surge. Cersei's smile faltered for the first time, as the first volley of arrows rained upon the walls. The Starks and their allies surged forward, their banners snapping in the cold. Morning air, King's Landing would not fall quietly, and Ned Stark knew this was only the beginning. The battle for King's Landing had begun. Arrows sliced through the pale morning air as the Stark archers loosed their first volley, striking the gold cloaks on the walls. Cries of pain and panic echoed across the mudgate, and several guards dropped where they stood. Yet, despite the chaos, no one touched the wildfire barrels. Not yet. Robb surged forward with his vanguard, his sword glinting in the dawn. The Great John bellowed commands, leading the northern shield wall up the slope toward the gate. Spearmen followed close behind, their formation-tight boots thudding against the cobblestones. The north moved like a single beast, silent except for the clash of steel and the deep growl of voices calling wind. Ned held his position at the rear, commanding the main force. His eyes never left the barrels of wildfire stacked beneath the gatehouse. One wrong move, one lit torch, and everything they had built would turn to ash. He turned to the Blackfish, who had just returned from scouting the side passages. There's a narrow postern near the Dragon Gate, Seer Brynden reported, barely guarded. If we split our forces, we could strike at the Red Keep from behind while they focus on the Mudgate? Ned nodded, considering. Take 200 men, he ordered, and move fast. Once you breach the inner ward, signal us. Robb and I will press from the front. The blackfish grinned, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. Aye, my lord, he said, and vanished into the chaos with his chosen men. Above, Cersei Lannister watched. Her expression calm, but her grip tight on the stone railing. Behind her stood Seer Marin Trant and Seer Burrows Blount, white cloaks shining in the torchlight. Loose the wildfire, Seer Marin urged, but Cersei's sharp glance silenced him. Not yet, she said coldly. Let them bleed first. On the ground, Janos Slint wavered, his loyalty cracking. He shouted for his men to hold, but many of the gold cloaks hesitated, glancing between the Stark banners and the red keep above. They knew where the power might soon lie. Robb was the first to reach the half-open mudgate. His blade flashed as he struck down a defender, then slammed his shoulder into the wooden doors. Behind him, the Great John and his men roared, pushing forward until the gate gave way with a splintering crack. The Starks poured into the city like a flood. Streets that had been silent moments before erupted with screams as the gold cloaks scattered. Some fighting, others throwing down their swords and fleeing. The northern war horns blared, drowning out the chaos. But victory was still far. Ned spotted movement on the walls. Lannister crossbowmen lining up to fire down on his son. He grabbed a fallen shield, ran forward, and threw it up just as the first wave of bolts hissed through the air. Robb, he shouted, stay low and push for the market square. Don't get trapped beneath the walls. Robb glanced back, nodded once, and led his vanguard deeper into the city, wolves and trout banners rising above the swirling smoke. The sound of clashing steel and dying men filled the air. Then came the second horn blast, the blackfish's signal. He had breached the Dragon Gate and was driving toward the Red Keep from the east. The trap Cersei had prepared was now turning against her. For the first time since the battle began, Ned Stark allowed himself a flicker of hope. But above them, on the parapet, Cersei whispered to Seer Marin, her voice cold as winter light. It burned them, if you must. The wildfire barrels beneath the gate were no longer just a threat. They were seconds from becoming a storm. The moment Cersei whispered the order, chaos threatened to swallow the battlefield whole. Ned's instincts screamed at him. The wildfire barrels were seconds away from igniting. He raised his sword and shouted over the clash of steel, fall. Back from the gate, pulled the men clear. Robb turned sharply, confusion flashing across his face. But when he saw the green-sealed barrels beneath the archway, his expression hardened. He signaled the Great John and Karstarks to pull their men back into the open square. Northern voices roared commands, and shields locked as they retreated in disciplined ranks, despite the arrows raining down from the walls. Then came the hiss. A torch, clutched by one of the gold cloaks loyal to the Lannisters, fell from the parapet. It tumbled in a slow, dreadful arc, and missed the nearest barrel by inches, shattering harmlessly on the cobblestones below. Ned exhaled sharply, relief bitter on his tongue. But the danger had not passed. The gold cloaks were divided, half fighting with the Starks now, the other half scrambling to obey Cersei's order. The mudgate itself became a battlefield within a battlefield, men turning their blades on one another, shouting curses as shields splintered and pikes clashed from the south. Davos Seaworth's smuggler fleet arrived in full force. Dozens of small boats, laden with Stark and Tully soldiers, swept ashore along the black water. The smuggler's voice carried above the din as he called, "Push to the keys. Cut off their retreat." Robb seized the opening, rallying his vanguard. "Forward," he shouted, leading the charge through the market square. The northern banners surged, wolves and trout snapping in the rising wind as steel met steel beneath. The red keeps looming shadow. Cersei's gaze darted along the walls. The wildfire plan was crumbling, and she knew it. Her soldiers were faltering, the gold cloaks splintering, and the Starks pressing deeper into the city than she'd anticipated. She turned sharply to Seer Boros Blount. "Fetch Joffrey," she hissed. "Bring him to the throne room and seal the doors." Meanwhile, Ned spotted the Blackfish's signal fires rising from the east, Bryndon. Tully's forces had broken through the Dragon Gate and were cutting their way through the inner wards to ward. The Red Keep, the Lannisters, were being squeezed. From two sides, their trap becoming their cage. Yet victory was still far from certain. A sudden roar shook the air, not from wildfire, but from the streets above the square. Lannister reinforcements, led by Seer Jaime himself, thundered down from the upper ward with 200 knights at his back, golden armor flashing in the pale sunlight. Robb wheeled his horse to face the oncoming cavalry, his blue eyes burning with fierce determination. "Father," he said, drawing his sword, "Jaime comes for us." Ned's grip tightened around ice. "Then we stand together," he replied. The cobblestones trembled beneath charging hooves, and the air grew thick with the scent of steel, sweat, and smoke. Two sons of Winterfell, father and heir, readied themselves for the clash that would decide the fate of King's Landing. The first wave of Jaime's knights smashed into Robb's shield wall, the sound deafening like thunder striking stone. Spears shattered, horses screamed, and the narrow streets erupted into a storm of blood and iron. Robb met Jaime head-on, their swords clashing in a shower of sparks. The young wolf and the Kingslayer locked in a deadly dance, Ned commanding. The second line cut down to Lannister knights with ice, the ancient blade singing through steel and bone. All around him, men cried, "Winterfell," as the north pushed back against the golden tide. But even as the Starks held their ground, Ned knew one thing. If the wildfire barrels were lit, none of it would matter. And high above, on the Red Keep's walls, Cersei raised her hand again, this time signaling a single man with a torch. Time slowed as Ned's eyes locked on the man above, torch in hand, poised to drop it onto the wildfire barrels below. The battle roared around him, clashing steel, screaming men, pounding hooves. But all he could hear was the rush of blood in his ears. One spark, and thousands would die. "Archers," Ned bellowed, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Bring him down." 3 northern bows snapped in unison. The torchbearer jerked an arrow through his chest and toppled backward, the torch spinning harmlessly into the darkness. Relief swept through the northern ranks, but there was no time to celebrate. Jaime Lannister's knights still pressed hard, their golden armor gleaming like fire under the rising sun. Robb clashed with Jaime himself, their swords meeting in furious, ringing strikes. Jaime fought like a storm, quick, precise, and relentless. But Robb's youth, strength, and raw instinct gave him an edge. "You should have stayed in the north, boy," Jaime hissed as their blades locked. Robb gritted his teeth, shoving him back with a surge of strength. "Winter has come for you, Kingslayer." Nearby, the Great Shon led the northern shield wall, smashing aside Lannister foot soldiers with sheer brute force, his laughter booming even as blood soaked his mail. Karstark archers rained death from the flanks, pinning Jaime's cavalry in the narrow streets. The tide was shifting slowly, painfully in favor of the Starks. On the eastern side, Brynden Blackfish Tully's forces had carved their way through the Dragon Gate and now advanced up the hill toward the Red Keep. His banners could be seen fluttering beyond the rooftops, cutting off any escape for Cersei and her loyalists. The city was being squeezed from both ends, and panic was spreading among the gold cloaks. Janos, Slint, torn between loyalty and survival, finally snapped. He roared for his men to stand down, throwing his own sword at Ned's feet. Hundreds of gold cloaks followed, lowering their weapons and surrendering to the wolves. With the city watch collapsing, the battle became a bloody contest between Stark Tully forces and the last desperate Lannister knights. Above them, Cersei watched from the walls, her face pale but her fury burning. She turned to Maester Pycelle, gripping his arm tightly. "Send the boy to the throne room," she ordered. "Seal the doors. If they reach us before Stannis or Renly arrives, we'll have no choice but to negotiate." Pycelle hesitated. "My queen, you mean to surrender?" Cersei's lips curled into a bitter smile. "No, I mean to make them think we will." Back in the streets, Ned spotted Jaime breaking free from Robb's assault, cutting down to Karstark. Men in his retreat. Robb lunged after him, but Ned raised a hand. "Let him go," he commanded. "There's no honor in dying in a back alley. Take the square. The Red Keep is next." Robb nodded reluctantly, pulling his forces together. The wolves advanced through the twisting streets, pushing past barricades and scattering the last of the Lannister defenders. Horns sounded from the east as the Blackfish's forces joined them, tightening the noose around the Red Keep. The banners of House Stark and House Tully now flew openly in the city for the first time, the and trout rising against the lion's fading roar. But even with the streets secured, Ned knew the hardest fight still lay ahead. Cersei Lannister was cornered, and a cornered lioness was at her most dangerous as Ned and Robb regrouped in the market square. Davos approached his smugglers, hands blackened with soot. "The river gates are ours, my lord," he reported. "But we've found something else. Caches of wildfire hidden beneath the bakeries and storehouses. If she lights even one..." Ned's jaw tightened. "Then we take the Red Keep before she draws her last breath." The drums of war beat louder, the smoke of burning streets rising into the morning sky. Inside the castle walls, Cersei was gathering her last cards. The Iron Throne still stood, and whoever claimed it now would rule the realm. The smoke of burning streets coiled upward into the pale morning sky as Ned, Stark, and Robb regrouped. In the market square, the men were bloodied, exhausted, but their spirit burned brighter than ever. The banners of House Stark and House Tully now flew high above the captured Mudgate, snapping proudly in the wind. Yet Ned knew victory wasn't theirs. Not yet. The Red Keep still stood, and inside it, Cersei Lannister was cornered like a lioness ready to strike. Robb rode up beside his father, his sword still slick with battle. "The lower city's ours," he said, his chest rising and falling fast. "But the keep won't yield easily. They've got knights, crossbows, and if the wildfire caches Davos found are real..." "They're real," Ned interrupted grimly, glancing at the smuggler standing nearby. Davos gave a curt nod. "We found more barrels beneath the storehouses, my lord," he said. "Enough to turn the whole city into green fire if someone foolish lights them." Ned looked toward the looming Red Keep. "Then we end this quickly, before Cersei grows desperate." From the east, horns sounded Brynden. Blackfish Tully's forces had reached the upper ward. the Stark and Tully armies now fully encircled. The Red Keep, their banners rising like a tide that could no longer be stopped. The lion was trapped, but everyone knew a wounded beast was the most dangerous. Jaime Lannister's knights regrouped at the castle gates, forming a tight wall of golden shields and polished steel. At their head, the Kingslayer himself stood grim, and unbowed, his white cloak torn but his blade steady. He had failed to stop Robb in the square, but he would not retreat again. Robb's jaw clenched as he spotted Jaime's banner. "He'll make his stand there," he muttered. "Let me face him, father. One duel, one victory, and the keep will fall without more blood." But Ned shook his head. "This isn't about honor. Robb Jaime Lannister fights like wildfire, fast, brilliant, and deadly. I will not risk you on his blade." Robb wanted to argue, but the Blackfish rode up before he could speak, his armor dented and streaked with blood. "We've sealed the eastern gates," Brynden reported. "The keep has nowhere left to run. But we've seen smoke rising from inside the walls. They're preparing something." Ned's brows drew together. "Wildfire," the Blackfish nodded grimly. "Aye, if they cannot hold the city, they'll burn it before they give it to us." Ned turned sharply to Davos. "Take a company and find every cache you can. Flood them, bury them, throw them in the river if you must. We cannot give Cersei her fire." As Davos hurried off, Robb raised his voice so his men could hear. "Form ranks, spears forward, shields locked. Today we take the Red Keep and free the realm from lions and lies." The northern soldiers roared their approval, their voices rolling like thunder across the square. Inside the Red Keep, chaos reigned. Cersei paced before the Iron Throne, her green eyes blazing, her hands trembling, though she hid it well. Joffrey sat slouched upon the throne, pale and fidgeting, his voice shrill as he shouted at Seer Burrows and Seer Marin to kill the traitors. Pycelle stammered nearby, "My queen. The city burns, the people cry out. If we yield, the boy may yet yield," Cersei hissed, spinning on him like a striking viper. "I will not kneel to wolves. I'll burn this city to the ground before I see Stark banners over my walls." From the balcony above, Tyrion Lannister watched silently, a goblet of wine in hand. His sharp eyes lingered on his sister, then drifted toward the windows, where smoke curled upward from the city below. "If you light that wildfire," he muttered under his breath, "you'll kill us all." Back in the square, Ned raised ice, the great Valyrian blade gleaming beneath the smoke-choked sun. "Forward," he commanded, and the Stark Tully host surged like a wave toward the Red Keep. The battle drums thundered, the gates trembled beneath the weight of thousands, and inside the castle, Cersei clenched her fists around a small golden dagger, her last desperate plan forming in silence. The storm was about to break. The ground beneath King's Landing trembled as the Stark Tully forces closed around the Red Keep. Smoke and blood thickened the air, the cries of wounded men mixing with the clash of steel and the thunder of war drums. The banners of the direwolf and trout rippled above the market square, but Ned Stark's grey eyes stayed fixed on the looming walls ahead. Victory was close, yet danger hung heavier than the mist over Blackwater Bay. Jaime Lannister's knights stood unbroken at the gates, their golden armor gleaming dully beneath soot-darkened skies. They were outnumbered, but their discipline was perfect, shields locked, spears angled. At their head, Jaime sat astride a blood-flecked destrier, his white cloak tattered but his confidence unshaken. Robb rode forward, his breath misting in the heat of the battle. "Father," he said, voice tight with resolve. Let me face Jaime. If I defeat him, the rest will break. We can end this without more slaughter. Ned shook his head, gripping ice tightly. The fate of the city won't be decided by single combat. Jaime's pride would have him fight you, but Cersei would burn the city before letting her brother's defeat decide her rule. We must push together. Before Robb could argue, horns sounded from the east. Brynden Blackfish Tully had reached the inner wards with his men and set fire to the Lannister siege engines. The roar of battle echoed through the alleys, signaling that the Red Keep was being surrounded on all sides. Inside the castle, panic spread. Servants fled down shadowed corridors, clutching children, while guards scrambled to block every entrance. In the throne room, Cersei paced before the Iron Throne. Joffrey, pale and wide-eyed where he sat, perched atop its barbed steel. "They're breaking through," shouted Seer Burrows Blount, sweat running down his face. "Then light the caches." Cersei snapped, her voice sharp and cold. "If the wolves take my city, they'll inherit nothing but ash." "No," Tyrion's voice cut through the chaos, his small form stepping into the center of the hall. He held his wine cup loosely, but his eyes blazed with rare fury. "Do that, sister, and you'll burn your son, your throne, and every soul in this city." Cersei's hand trembled as she gripped the edge of the throne, but her pride would not allow her to yield. "Better ash than chains," she spat back outside. The Stark Tully forces advanced under heavy fire. Crossbow bolts hissed from the ramparts, forcing Robb's men to hunker behind their shields. The Great John bellowed orders, Karstark archers loosed volley after volley, and Davos returned from the river with grim news. "We've drowned some of the wildfire caches, my lord," he said to Ned, "but not all. If they light the ones beneath the Red Keep, the whole hill goes up." Ned's jaw clenched. "Then we take the gates now, before she dares it." He raised ice high, its Valyrian steel edge reflecting the flames around them, and shouted, "Winterfell." The northern cry rolled like thunder across the square, shaking the Lannister defenders. With a deafening crash, Stark and Tully soldiers surged forward, smashing into Jaime's shield wall. Robb's horse reared, his sword flashing as he cut down a knight in crimson plate. Jaime came for him like lightning, his blade striking with deadly precision. Sparks flew as their swords clashed. The two young lions, the wolf and the Kingslayer, locked in a storm of steel. Jaime sneered between blows. "You're better than I expected, boy, but you'll never hold this city." Robb's reply was a fierce roar as he drove Jaime back, his strikes fueled by the cries of his men and the memory of Winterfell's cold winds. Around them, the shield. Walls crumbled, knights fell, screaming, and the blood-soaked cobblestones ran slick beneath their boots. Then, from the east, a third horn sounded, the Blackfish's signal. His men had breached the second gate inside the Red Keep's outer ward. The lion banners atop the walls began to fall, one by one, swallowed by wolves and trout. Jaime glanced up, saw the collapsing defenses, and knew the truth. If the Starks reached the throne room before Cersei acted, the Lannisters were finished. He disengaged from Robb with a sudden feint and shouted to his remaining knights, "To the keep, defend the queen." As Jaime's forces fell back, Cersei's last command echoed through the Red Keep like a whisper of doom. "Light it." Ned looked up toward the castle windows, his breath freezing in his chest as faint green glimmers danced in the shadows. If the wildfire burned now, King's Landing would be lost. A roar thundered through King's Landing as chaos reached its peak. Ned Stark's heart pounded when he saw the faint green glow flickering in the Red Keep's windows. Wildfire. If Cersei succeeded, the entire city would vanish in one great inferno. Archers, Ned shouted, his voice carrying above the battle. Aim for the torchbearers on the walls. Stop them before the fire spreads. Northern bows twanged arrows, slicing through the smoke-filled air. 2 torchbearers fell, their flames extinguished before reaching the caches. But another man dashed along the parapet, torch blazing bright. Just as he leaned forward to hurl it down, a single shaft from a Karstark archer pierced his throat. The torch fell harmlessly into the courtyard. Relief surged through Ned for only a moment, because from the throne room balcony came the chilling sound of Cersei's voice. Sharp and commanding, light it beneath the keep. Inside the castle, Tyrion lunged toward his sister, grabbing her wrist before she could hand the final order to the pyromancer. "Listen to me, Cersei," he shouted, his voice raw with fury. "If you burn this city, you'll burn Joffrey with it. Every lion, every cub, all turned to ash." Cersei's face twisted with anger and desperation. "You think I care who dies, imp? I will not let wolves rule from my father's throne." Before she could strike him, Seer Mandon Moore burst into the hall, blood dripping from his white cloak. "Your Grace," he gasped, "the outer gates have fallen. The Starks are at the inner yard." The throne room fell silent. Even Joffrey's shrill cries ceased as the weight of those words settled like a shroud dot back in the courtyard. Robb and Jaime clashed once more, blades ringing, sparks flying. Jaime fought with furious precision, but Robb's youth and strength drove him forward, strike after relentless strike. With one final swing, Robb knocked Jaime's sword from his hand, sending it skittering across the blood-slick stones. He leveled his own blade at the Kingslayer's throat. Jaime's smirk returned, even in defeat. "Go on then, Stark. Take me prisoner. See if it saves you from my sister's madness." Robb hesitated only a breath before calling, "Bind him." 2 northern soldiers seized Jaime, wrenching him to his knees. The Golden Knight was theirs. With Jaime captured, panic swept through the remaining Lannister ranks. Some dropped their swords and fled. Others surrendered where they stood. The roar of Winterfell Tully rose from the northern host as they pressed toward the Red Keep. Ned led the final push through the shattered gates, ice gleaming red beneath the rising sun. The fighting inside the keep was brief but brutal, a tide of wolves crashing through lion-guarded halls. At last, Ned reached the throne room doors and shoved them open, his men flooding in behind him. Cersei stood before the Iron Throne, her golden hair tangled, her green eyes burning with defiance. Tyrion stood at her side, breathing hard, and Joffrey cowered behind the throne's spiked steel. "It's over," Ned said, his voice low, steady, unyielding. "The city is ours. Lay down your arms, and your children will be spared." For a long, terrible moment, Cersei said nothing. Then, slowly, she lowered the dagger she had drawn, her breath ragged. "You think you've won, Stark," she whispered, venom curling in every word. "But the game doesn't end here. The wolves will bleed, too." Ned's gaze didn't waver, perhaps. But today, King's Landing stands, and winter has come. Outside, the bells of the Great Sept tolled, announcing the fall of the city. Stark banners rose above the Red Keep for the first time in history. The direwolf flying high over the conquered capital. King's Landing was theirs, but deep inside. Ned knew this was only the beginning. The realm would not forget, and the lions would not forgive.